Welcome to the Green Wasp Removal YouTube channel. This is part 6 of the Polistes Dominula European Paper Wasp Nest Development Series, documenting a complete season for this nest from the time it was discovered in May of 22 through November of 22. For the best viewing experience, you may want to check out our YouTube channel playlist to look at all the previous parts of this series prior to watching this particular section of the series. We also recommend you set your YouTube viewing settings to the highest quality image you can get. Let's begin with a 5-minute preview of this series. This video was shot in the USA, in the state of Indiana, and North America. In this series, we show you the entire life cycle of a European paper wasp colony. That's Polistes Dominula, from the time the nest was discovered in May of 22 with about a dozen cells on it, built by these two co-foundresses you see here, all the way through midsummer when it peaked in size with over 200 cells built on the nest, till the end of the nest life cycle in October-November of 2022, when it wound down and the population died off and flew off to mate. We'll show you the cell count that were visible during each of the growth stages it went through. It was fun to document how fast they were building out this nest. We'll show you all the drama these two co-foundress queens went through as they defended their nest from predators of all sorts that wanted to eat their eggs or larvae or parasitize their nest. We watched them fight off spiders and mites and ants and parasitic insects. The ants in particular were very aggressive and they kept attacking the nest. You'll see this ant crawled right into one of the cells and tried to eat one of the eggs right there. The wasp turns around, sets off her alarm buzzing wings, and she grabs it by the leg and throws it right out of there. This was a very common occurrence. It was a daily thing, having to fight for their nest, fight for their territory. We couldn't help but be impressed at the number of times they used their wasp judo, just grabbing the leg or the antenna of the invader and just chucking it off the nest. There were parasitic wasps coming at them. They were always on alert and vigilant. They fought off mites and they fought off other types of insects that attempted to live in or around the nest. There's a whole related ecosystem of insects that target wasp nests and wasp larvae. We'll show you what it looks like when the wasp queens lay eggs inside the cells, which is what you see here. We'll show you all the life stages inside the nest, from the eggs to the newly hatched larva, to the mature larva, all the way through to the pupating larvae that become adult wasps when they chew their way out of the cell after pupation. And we'll also show you what it looks like when the pupating wasps, who have developed through the egg and larva stage, are born and chew their way out of the pupating silk caps that they cover their cells with. And we'll show you the process of how they go out to forage for wood fiber, which they collect off of aged wood, and they fly it back to the nest, where they will inspect the nest and decide which cell they want to work on, and they'll build each cell one at a time, and they'll maintain any that need repair with that material. We'll also show you how they bring back insect protein that they hunt in the wild, they share it with each other, and they malaxate it, which means they chew it up into a fine pulp, and they use that food to feed their larvae. And we'll show you that process in detail. You don't have to watch a wasp colony very long to find out what good biological control agents they are, reducing populations of insects around your property. Unfortunately, with invasive species, this goes both ways. It can be damaging to the local ecosystem if they're reducing the amount of resources available to our native wasps, who rely basically on the same insect population to feed their larvae. We'll show you how they bring nectar back and create a honey-like substance for food. They also bring back water, and they attach droplets to the cell walls to hydrate the nest and keep it cool. We'll show you the process of Trophallaxis, which is where they engage in mouth-to-mouth exchange of fluids. You'll see how the two foundresses engage in dominance behaviors, such as here, where they're nipping at each other and headbutting each other. And you'll see as the dominance hierarchy becomes established on the nest, the alpha female will shake her abdomen like a rattlesnake, and she'll sort of nibble at the heads of the others until they drop their antenna and bow down to the queen, and that's how they maintain dominance on the nest. And we'll show you examples of that. We'll show you how later in the season the males begun to be born in the nest, and the reproductive females, who are going to be queens the following season. After they hibernate, they'll go out and start colonies. So the goal of this video is to show you the complete life cycle of a Polistes Dominula nest. The European paper wasp. They're very, very common now as invasive species here in North America. You will probably see these this upcoming spring and summer. So keep an eye out for these, and we hope when you see them next, you'll know exactly how they operate. As always, we thank you for being here. We had a great time in the 6 months that we began the channel in 2022, and we hope to bring you a lot more fun content in 23. Here we'll step back in time to June of 2022. We'll pick up where we left off at the end of part 5. We'll start part 6 on June 23rd of 2022. We estimate about 90 cells on the nest now, with about 48 visible on this side from this angle. On June 23rd, 2022, we decided to do a profile angle for the entire shoot for this day. So you'll see an uninterrupted one-take shot. This shot lasted about an hour. We edited it down here to about 30 minutes. From this perspective, you can get a better idea of all the activity on the nest. You can also see the different levels of the nest, from the very bottom, where most of the wasps hang out, to the very top, up near the barn eaves roof, where it's connected, where they often hang out as well. As you can see here in the red circle, we can introduce you to the first male born on the nest. You can tell this little guy is a male because of his cane or hooked shaped antenna with little curls on the end. And also his face has more yellow coloring on it than the females. The males usually have yellow mandibles, where the females will have black mandibles, which makes the male faces look longer and more yellow than the females. If you look at this still shot, you can really see the difference between the male on the right and the female on the left. See the yellow in the male's mandibles, where the female's mandibles are black, and see the little hooks at the end of his antenna. The females usually have straighter ends on their antenna. When you look at them side by side, it's very easy to compare them, especially with the hooked antenna. And that's common among many of the males in the Polistes wasp species of various types. It's also worth noting here that the males cannot sting. The stinger is exclusive to the female wasp. If you do catch a male and surprise them, they will try to mimic a sting behavior, where they poke the end of their abdomen against your skin, but there's no stinger there. In this shot, the male's on the left and the female's on the right. You can see the male has a longer abdomen with an extra body segment. You can see that the female does not have that extra body segment. She has a shorter body in general. So at this stage of the nest development, we're starting to see the reproductives get born. And males are part of the reproductives that get born later in the season. And also the fertile females will start to be born. These will be the queens for the following year. What they will have is a mating season, and then they will go into hibernation over the winter, and then they will wake up in the spring and start their own colonies. But for now, the brand new male's job is to just hang out on the nest, eat whatever food he can find or is given, and he will just lounge. That's what the males tend to do. They kick back, they don't forage, they just eat resources on the nest, and the females have to support them until they do their job of mating with the females, and then they can die off for the season, where the female gynes, or the ones who are able to have eggs that are fertile, they will go into hibernation. So you see how here on the nest, foraging continues, but it's the females doing the active foraging. The males will go out and feed themselves nectar, but they don't tend to forage for the nest, bringing back insects. They don't hunt the insects and bring them back to the nest for feeding the larvae. They just take care of themselves. But the flip side for what might be perceived as a much easier life than the females have is that the males die right away. They don't survive into the next season like the hibernating females, and they have a much shorter lifespan in general. Keep your eye on this wasp in the red circle. You're going to watch her react to a fly who enters their space and then leaves. She tracks it in and watches it all the way out. They're very aware of their nest space, and they're very defensive of it at this point. As the population on the nest grows, you see a lot more trophallaxis happening routinely throughout the nest between adults and also between adults and larvae. Trophallaxis is how they exchange fluids mouth to mouth for hydration and nutrition and feedings, and also it's part of their dominance and communication. It's a very complex behavior. In this shot we see two things happening. One is you can see one of the small insects that's a parasite on the nest going cell to cell. It's looking for food and somewhere to lay its eggs. It may lay its eggs in or on the wasp larva, and in that way infest the nest with parasites. What's also happening here is you see one of the adult wasps come over and attempt to lay an egg inside one of the cells. It's lowering its abdomen into the cell, and typically that's egg-laying posture, and it will attach an egg to the side of the cell wall. This wasp is not one of our founding queens or foundresses that helped start the nest from scratch. This is one of the younger wasps that was born on the nest, one of the females, and she is attempting to lay an egg here. That will happen on a wasp nest. The founding queens will do most of the egg laying. The beta queens, or the subordinate foundresses, will do some of the egg laying sometimes, and every now and then one of the other females will lay eggs as well. Now sometimes the dominance hierarchy on the nest will result in the foundress queen or the alpha queen eating the eggs of the others. So there is some competition on the nest between the adult females regarding who gets to lay the eggs. It's not nearly as cut and dry as it is with, say, honeybees that have one main queen who does nothing but lay all the eggs and that sort of thing. So there can be multiple females taking part in the growth of this nest in different ways. Here's another example of egg-laying behavior. Keep your eye on this wasp in the red circle. You'll see her first taking a drink from some of the larvae, and then she looks around and discovers this cell, which is an empty cell, no larva in it. So she goes down into the cell and she prepares it to lay an egg. Now usually what they'll do is they'll produce body fluids that will help stick the egg to the side of the cell wall, and then she will lower her abdomen in. She'll stay very still for about a couple of minutes, and that's how long it takes for the egg to pass through her body and stick onto the side of the cell wall. But they appear to do a lot of preparation work prior to laying the egg in the cell. This is the egg-laying posture where she spreads all her legs out around the cell and she drops her abdomen in, and she'll stay very still here for just a moment. That's how you can tell she's actually laying an egg. And we'll watch this in real time while she gets this process done. While she lays the egg, we'll listen to the ambient sound in the neighborhood. You may hear sounds of machinery or traffic or neighbors. It's a pretty busy neighborhood. Here she's finished up and now she's inspecting her work, make sure the egg is secured okay, and she'll come back and check on this egg multiple times typically after she lays an egg. Here a forager returns and does Trophallaxis with a couple of wasps on the nest. You see how they exchange a clear fluid. This is typically nectar and water collected in the field. Sometimes you'll see a thicker, darker fluid, which typically is a malaxated protein from insects, and then they will feed that to the larva. Keep your eye on this wasp in the circle. You're going to see an egg thief in action. See how she bends down into this cell and spends a fair amount of time down there doing something. Well, what you'll see here in a moment is she's digging out one of the other's eggs. One of the other adult wasps had laid an egg in there, it had hatched maybe, and was becoming a very tiny larva. She pulls it out, she flies away to eat it. We'll replay that for you in slow motion, blown up a little bit to give you a better look at it. This is a very important behavior in wasp nests in general. The competing females on the nest, several of which may be able to lay eggs, will compete with each other by going into cells like you see this one here. She's bending into the cell. What she's doing is she's discovering there's another wasp's egg in there, and she realizes she's going to pull that out and eat it, and will ultimately probably try to replace it with one of her own. Alternately, sometimes they just eat each other's eggs as food for protein. And they will do this and then regurgitate that food to the larva and feed the larva with those eggs. So there's a couple of reasons why this might occur, but it happens fairly often. You'll see them in a previous episode in this same series pulling a pupated wasp out and eating it. Just like this time they're pulling an egg out, but in a previous episode they pulled a fully grown pupating wasp that was about to hatch out of its silk cap, and they ate it. So this type of behavior would easily explain why we see the foundress, the alpha queen on the nest, relaying eggs into the same cells multiple times. Usually they only want one egg in each cell, but we've seen in this series the alpha queen routinely laying an egg in the same cell over different periods of time. This is probably why the egg disappears or is eaten and she needs to replace it. Here we see another wasp preparing to lay an egg in this cell. She gets into the egg laying position, but then she's interrupted here by Trophallaxis. Just then several wasps have to defend the nest. They jump into action when another wasp, a different species of Polistes, shows up. In the middle of that action, another wasp attempts to lay an egg in one of the empty cells, but then seems to get interrupted or changes her mind. Looks like she's still trying to prepare it. We'll replay in slow motion that clip that showed the visitor from another nest suddenly showing up that caused such a strong reaction from a couple of the defenders on the nest. You see this wasp flying in from the lower right part of the frame. This is actually a northern paper wasp flying in to either attack or observe, or is just curious about that nest, and they immediately run it off. We freeze the frame here for you to give you a better look at the color variations, quite different than the Polistes Dominula coloring. This is actually a Polistes Fuscatus, or northern paper wasp, that has a nest not far from this one. Here the northern paper wasp returns again, and the defenders are surprised by her visiting this nest. We'll replay that here in slower motion. If you look at the colors on this northern paper wasp when it shows up, this is the Polistes Fuscatus. It has a nest only a couple feet away, actually, from this nest. And it may be that she comes in observing this nest, thinking it might have been her own. It's a little unclear. But she visited this nest a couple of times. We saw that at least 2 or 3 times during this series. And vice versa, we also did a series on the Polistes Fuscatus, which we'll be posting in the future, where we see the Polistes Dominula here stop by the Fuscatus nest. And they were never welcome at each other's nests, so they were ready to rumble whenever it happened. You can see them all on alert here, and they stay on alert until that wasp is out of there. Here you see them doing Trophallaxis, sharing clear fluid. Take a look on the upper right, you see our male up there, kind of hanging out, not taking part in too much of the fray. That's what they do best up there. While a couple of the defenders are still out chasing away the northern paper wasp, you see this wasp here attempting to lay another egg. So on this day there was a constant attempt by multiple wasps to lay eggs in these empty cells, and we saw them stealing each other's eggs, and we've seen a lot of activity for foraging and for nest defense. So as the population grows on the nest, more activity occurs constantly. We'll speed this up for timing until she's done with her egg laying process. Here back in real time, you'll see another start to maybe assume the egg laying position right next to her. So there's a lot going on for eggs right now. But she's interrupted the other one by some Trophallaxis, so she stops trying to lay her egg, leaving the other one there. Here we'll speed it up again just a little bit. The other one is so still because she's actually passing an egg onto the side of the cell wall right now. Now we'll transition back to real time. She's done with the egg laying process and now checking on her egg. Here a few minutes later, we see some more egg laying activity, or at least the beginnings of that posture. But she decides to stop again for the time being. But then a moment later, she goes back to it. You'll notice that the others on the nest come over and interact with her occasionally throughout the process. It's hard to tell if they're trying to interrupt her or what's happening here, but she stays down in there long enough that she may well have passed an egg onto the side of the cell. Hard to tell what's really going on in these cells because we can't really see inside them, so a lot of this is guesswork based on their behavior. Here we'll take a look at the wasp on the left in the red circle. That's the male. The male has come down to relieve himself. You'll notice that wasps never go to the bathroom in their nest, and so that's what you see here. This wasp is expelling some waste, and they do that by making sure they're clear of the nest so that the waste falls away to the ground. That's how they keep the nest very neat and clean. They will often release waste in flight away from the nest as well. Here we see the male on the upper left in the red circle come down from the top of the nest and curl up his abdomen, moving it toward the female. He's pursuing the female in an attempt to mate with her. She moves along, so this one doesn't work out, so he has to keep looking for another partner on the nest. If he can't find one on this nest to mate with, he'll fly off and he'll mate with another female out in another nest somewhere out in the environment. So on this particular episode, he was denied. Now he will keep trying, as you'll see in a moment. Meanwhile, foraging continues. The newer wasps on the nest are not yet bringing back a lot of food for the nest or much to work with, but they may have some nectar that they share here through Trophallaxis with some of the other wasps. Here we see more egg-laying activity again. You'll see her attempt several times to get her abdomen down into the cell to do the egg-laying, but she gets interrupted by all sorts of different contacts from other wasps and foragers returning, and Trophallaxis happening. We'll speed up this clip and you'll see multiple attempts over the next few minutes on high speed of her trying to get into that cell and lay an egg. And we can only assume after so many attempts that we've seen on this day that there must be at least one egg that made it onto the side of the cell wall in there. And hopefully none of the other adults will eat it. Meanwhile, there's lots of activity on the nest with foragers coming back and Trophallaxis happening between multiple wasps, starting to become a very busy place. Here we have another egg-laying attempt. Here we see our male find another female. He's going to attempt to mate with her. Watch how his abdomen elongates, and then you'll see him open up the end of his abdomen. His sexual organs will come out and attempt to connect to the end of the female. Now, for this to happen successfully, the female also has to open up the end of her abdomen, but if she keeps it closed, then it'll be a failed mating attempt. So we'll let you watch this in real time so you get an idea how wasps actually perform the mating act in the wild, and we'll find out whether or not this guy is successful. You can see here how the male has mounted her. He's holding her in place with his hind legs while he kind of strokes her shoulder with his foreleg. But despite this technique from the male, it doesn't appear that she's opening her abdomen, in which case this may result in a failed mating attempt, and the male will have to look elsewhere or return at another time. Meanwhile, we see yet another egg-laying attempt here. So this becomes kind of a constant behavior, often in the same cells, as the various wasps attempt to keep this nest very viable with new eggs. We'll just speed up the clip here until she's completed the egg-laying process. Meanwhile, there's plenty of foraging coming back to the nest. Mostly, it appears, fluids and nectars coming back to the nest, based on all the Trophallaxis, but not a lot of insect protein coming back for the larvae today. Here we see one of the foragers coming back, and it has some wood pulp in its mandibles that it collected out in the field, and it's malaxating that wood pulp, and it'll climb up onto the top of the nest where the nest is affixed to the eaves of the barn, and you'll see it working on strengthening the petiole up there, which is the pedestal that keeps that nest connected to the barn. Because as the nest grows, it'll be more and more important that it's securely attached to the barn. The larvae and the pupating wasps and the adult wasps on the nest, as well as all the extra cells, make the nest very heavy. Here we see one of the wasps fanning the nest. This is where they use their wings like an air fan and just blow air across the cells of the nest to try to lower the temperature on the nest. They do this in the hot weather throughout the hot season. They'll do it more and more as it gets hotter in the summer. And that brings footage from this day to a close. We appreciate you being here as always. Join us soon for part 7 of this series, and we'll see you then. Have a good one.